I mourn the loss of the earlier Celtic people who saw that vision of the thinning of the two worlds, the natural world and the other world. I mourn the loss of all earlier people who could see the messages the natural world had to offer at specific times of year, particularly the time of Halloween. I, of course, mourn the loss of my own people, but I mourn the loss of all people who had the good sense to see what the natural world and its signs and its transforming values were all about. Sometimes it can seem like the autumn landscape is a little like a stage set, in the sense that it's dramatic, it's powerful, it's beautiful, it's courageous. And what we have to then turn our minds to is the fact that the natural world is expressing many of the values that humans were meant to express. And in earlier times, we probably would have taken on the task of making these values part of our own makeup. That's what we worked at as we were growing up, as we were maturing into adults. It's easy to look at a natural landscape in the autumn and to think that it's all just easy peasy, it's all just as it happens to be. But if we look a little more closely, we start to see the workings of what this actually means in terms of transformation, in terms of character. Break it down and analyse it. Look at a leaf falling. Look at the colour around you when the leaves turn gold. Does this happen just because it happens? What in the natural world makes something transform itself? It's not a thing. The natural world is not a thing. We tend to thingify just about everything these days because we've moved into a world where there doesn't seem to be any life in many things. We only think there's life in ourselves these days. We've lost our animistic connections to just about everything we come into contact with. And life is everywhere. Life is in everything. Except the way we live means that we draw the life out of things. So this makes transformation within ourselves quite difficult. And so we have to transform into the idea of transforming, which sounds a bit crazy. That's the task we're charged with. We've got to attach these values to what we're trying to do with our lives. And heavens knows, if we can do that, we are going to make such great strides towards rejoining the natural world, linking up with her again. It's a serious business. There are all sorts of reasons for doing it. It's not just a pretty little idea. It's an essential idea. Transform into the way the natural world works. Transform into those values, and they come quick and fast in the autumnal season. The original Celtic Halloween period had a lot to do with death, with re-establishing links with ancestors and allowing their influence back into the lives of the people. Fire helps with a transformational and a ritualistic process, and fire is, after all, the closest element we have to the sun, and therefore to daylight. It's a powerful source of helping you work through a period that takes you from the light into the darkness. But, of course, when you open a door to the other world, you not only open it to ancestors, but also some rather unsavoury spirits and ghosts and shadows. Spirits that might just not be your ancestors. And that is why scary costumes always came into play, so that we could ward off whatever was there that we didn't want to see or know. Compare this picture of modern Halloween costume with this one that was taken in the early 20th century. There's a distinctly simplistic and rather naive tribal element to it, perhaps harking back to an earlier, more primitive era. Often turnips were used in earlier times, preceding the pumpkin, which came about following the Irish migration to America. The Romany people, with their strong animistic awareness, believed that pumpkins came to life over the Halloween period, and they might get up to any kind of mischief if you weren't careful. But I'm sure you'll agree with me that the modern costume just doesn't cut it for being scary at all. Which would the real early Celts have been wary of? Well, we can be certain that their definition of fear would have been vastly different from our own. To begin with, they were fearsome warriors. If we think about courage, we automatically think of its opposite, fear. And fear has changed considerably. Fear now resides inside, trapped within all of us, transforming itself into emotional problems, perhaps mental health conditions, all kinds of phobias and things we don't really want in our lives. And we don't really need that kind of transformation to be taking place today. The Celts, like many other ancient tribes, kept a clear vision of what the other world was actually all about. And today we of course forget the earthier, rougher element that was attached to many tribal folk. There was not the niceness that we attach to them today. Whatever you might say about them, they were far more aware of the other world. So therefore, far more connected to the workings of life. Gradually, over a long period of time, we lost that connection with the natural world and her sister, the other world. So now we have a hard task to try and forge our way back into the way we used to think. It is possible, but we will have to work a little to achieve that kind of relationship again. We, of course, cannot leave religion out of the equation. It had a marked effect on many ancient Celtic tribal traditions, along with other tribal traditions, including my own, and also the ancient cycles. Christians did not like the pagan ways. They thought they were very crude and ugly and unnecessary to life. Courtesy of a pope, this pope, a celebration was moved from May to the end of October or the beginning of November. Perhaps an 8th century trick-or-treat. It isn't about my way or my religion or your religion. It became an argument like that, but that's really not what it's about. It's about the loss of the natural world values. And unfortunately, religion was very clever at shifting the power and emphasis and energy into man-made structures and ditching the values that the natural world liked to share with us. Now, this is a grave mistake. The values alter significantly. We no longer see the values in a tree when he or she grows, how that tree may speak to us. We no longer see the values in much at all in the natural world, the communication it has that teaches us about life. Transformation that the seasons give us so that we can take on that very value ourselves, that idea of growth and change and courage and humility, and passing into a new phase, just as the natural world would do. Most importantly, accepting the challenges and the hardships that the natural world's creatures will often teach us. That is what we need to be focusing on, especially at Halloween time of year. The way we might have dressed during Halloween celebrations is very different from the way we would dress today. We called upon animals and we called upon spirits that we thought had access to the other world. Glamorous or sexy, or someone who has the wow factor in the way they dress. We are image conscious in a very, very different way today. Myths, tales, rituals, traditions based on natural cycles are well and truly gone, and we've really nothing left except commercialism. We have to remember how strong the spirits of the other world were and what they meant to us. Now we have lost that completely. We've abandoned the other world. Trick-or-treating, as we know it today, has a quite short history, developed from the idea of placating bad spirits, ghosts and tricksters of the other world, all of whom are summoned by the oncoming darkness. This is so that they don't bring you bad luck. This began with laying out a feast for otherworldly beings, which the original early Celtic celebrations were about. You were also treating your ancestors, and by treating the bad guys as well as the good, you got to keep everyone happy. Dressing up as those evil spirits and tricksters, or trying to, was the next step in placating them. For if those who dwell in darkness believe you are one of them, they are more likely to leave you alone. We need to reconnect with how they were in the past, and we can probably feel a little more connected to the way we really used to be. It's important to remember that we are all derivatives of Earth. We tend to behave as though the Earth is derived from us, and it's not that way round at all. We need to humble ourselves far more. And we need to remember that we're the same as all the other creatures or beings on Earth, the birds and the animals and the fish in the sea, and we're no different. We tend to believe we are, but we are no different at all. That being the case, perhaps it's easier to see why we need to adhere to the workings and principles of the natural world. And when I say we need to transform, you might say, into what? What are these principles and values you speak of, which the Earth has, but which we don't have, but used to have a very long time ago? How do we rediscover those gems that turn the summer into autumn, and the autumn into winter, and the winter into spring? Perhaps we need to break this down a little so that we can see it a bit more clearly. Let's take the ancient value of courage. That is really age-old, and something that everyone has had to encounter and embrace at some point in their lives. When we think of summer turning to autumn and we think of leaves falling, the leaf falling is an act of letting go. How many times have you thought you would like to let go of something, and you're often unable to do it because you don't always feel you have the courage to do it? That's the sort of value I'm talking about that the natural world has. It's not about science. Science didn't exist a long time ago. Science didn't exist to educate us on what the natural world is about and how the natural world works. And here we have to ask an important question. Is science educating us about the way the natural world works, or is it conditioning us? And for millions of years, it was about the courage to let go of a leaf when it fell to the ground. A good warrior will never make a song and dance about having courage, because within courage there can be something of humility, and that's another value that the natural world has. When the leaves start to fall, there's a humility and grace in the courage, and that is something we could all adopt. We've come so far away from that in these times, but it in fact is something that we can rediscover even in these very materialistic and non-hunter-gatherer and non-ancient times. If we look at earlier tribal folk, the Celtic people, we see that their definition of courage and fear is vastly different from our own. Really and truly, we need to be able to take the bits that are important from the earlier tribal folk. We need to take the values of transforming with the natural world, and we need to leave behind the things that they developed into, such as warfare and land ownership and warfare over land ownership. We need to extract, I suppose, all those parts that people used to have, if we go right back to the hunter-gatherers and find that seed, just like the seed of a tree that you can watch grow, leave the things behind that developed as a result of civilization coming on, and take with you those parts that are fundamental to all life on Earth. And the thinning of the veil at Halloween teaches us how to do that. Try an exercise here. Imagine you're back in an earlier prehistoric era. The wise one in your tribe has asked you to walk through the doorway ahead, fashioned by two trees, and to take with you a problem you've presented, which you'd like to change. As you near that doorway, think of what the woodland is acting out around you. And as you pass through that doorway, absorb the courage and strength you're being shown, remembering that you're not alone with what you're experiencing. For it is that time when the veil between the worlds has thinned and ancestors are reaching out to you. Find the courage and strength which they can give to you at this time. Step forward, renewed. So, when we're passing through this Halloween period of time, remember, it's not just a day, it's a period of time that stretches all the way up to winter solstice, twilight, dawn, and the autumnal season, or the fall, is a time when the bridges to the other world start to form. And if we're not constructive in our views on this, we'll more than likely become destructive. The Celts, like many other early tribal folk, gave us much that we lost. They may have adopted farming. They may have become fierce warriors. They may have enjoyed collecting Roman heads. But their women had positions of power, and their culture bequeathed us many features and traditions, Halloween being one of them, that we still acknowledge today. And natural world values at this time of year are important to remember for our well-being.